Okay, the first thing I want to talk about is the exam. And I'd say that went pretty darn good. All right, it went well. I was happy. And again, since you all have agreed, I know for a fact that there was absolutely no cheating, and that is why these grades are so spectacular. Anyway, I wonder if I implemented one of those monitors on the exams, if these scores would, no, I don't know. But check it out. The average exam score was like a 94%. Because if you've noticed now at this point that there's questions and then there were 5 bonus items at the end there. Did you all see that? So that some people are getting higher than 100% even. Did you realize that? Yeah, well, the last 5 questions, I believe, are totally bonus. So you're like, sweet, good to go. And to be honest, it was because they were there from a previous semester and I didn't plan on using them, but I totally forgot that they were there. And so I'm like, what the hell? Give you a little bit of bonus, right? Give you a little bit of freebies. So you can see here, the average exam grade was 94, but the average in the course at this point is 83. Okay? There are 450 points as of this morning. So if you want to know what you're looking at, go to the column, the total column, divide by 450, and that is exactly what your percentage is at this moment. Okay? So divide by 450. I put in midterm grades last week, and it was just literally, I just took how many points. I believe I did midterm grades Thursday morning, Thursday, whatever, Thursday. They were due Thursday, so you know Thursday. And all I did was just take the total, divide, and if it was, 90 to 100, I put an A in there, I put a B in there, I put a C in there, whatever. So midterm grades, they are exactly what they are. If you forced me to give you a grade at this point, that would be what it would be. Okay, so they mean absolutely nothing in the long sense, but it does give you at least some kind of a reflection on where you're at this point. All right. Something like that. So I can simply tell you that any scores that are down here are because of missed assignments, right? Because of the zeros in the grade book. That's the only reason those are happening. Okay? So that's on y'all. Okay, so we ready to move into a new unit? Good stuff. The enthusiasm I get in this room. Guess I'll have to have enough enthusiasm for all of us, right? So in this unit, generically labeled social processes, we're going to talk about development. Today we're going to start talking about, how babies, well, in fact, we're going to start talking about where babies come from, right? No visuals, right? Just where do they come from? And how do we develop and grow? How do we start from a very small thing and become sophisticated adults? We'll be talking about motivation and emotion in the next chapter. It's like, why do we get out of bed in the morning? Where do our emotions come from? What are emotions? Things of this nature. We'll be talking about personality. And this is one of my least favorite topics in psychology, simply because once you get into personality, you're starting to get as far away from science as you can get. All right? In my opinion, there's nothing in the personality chapter that sniffs of science at all. To me, it's just like voodoo made up bullshit. So it's important, right, to know all of it, but it's just not my happiest thing. So we're going to buzz that one in like one class period and get it off my desk. But then we get one of the coolest topics in the entire chapters in the entire course, and that's social psychology. Social psychology is powerful. Because, we can talk about who you are as an individual and what you are, but you know what happens? You, on a bus, is a different person than you alone in a room with your friend. I mean, you're a different person in different social contexts. People around you make you different people. So we're going to talk about the effect other people have on who you are. Okay? So it'll be a good unit as a whole, as long as we can make it our way through. And I'll sell it as best I can, but whatever. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117, 118, 119, 1 All right, so today, this is good stuff. In the fall, I teach a course in child psychology, and I really enjoy child psych. And when I first came here to Wesleyan, a long time ago, there was 2 people who were teaching child psych, neither of which had ever had children in their life. And I'm like, this is stupid. How could people that have never had children in their life possibly truly talk about how children develop? Because I can tell you as a parent, and we're going to talk some parenting stuff in here, it's like, I can tell you exactly how you should be a parent. Now let's talk about the realities of being a parent, all right? The realities of raising a little snot-nosed. Just saying, them wonderful, wonderful money grubbers. All right, so let us start talking. Okay, apparently because good. That will explain why the buttons don't work. All right, so when we get to lifespan development, we need to think about 2 different ways. Because, well, you know, we think of development essentially like when we were in the chapter on learning. Remember with classical conditioning, and we were like, you start out really, really basic and simple. Remember John Watson and Baby Elwood. When a baby's born, they're born with the emotions of fear, rage, and love, right? They're incredibly simple. And then through learned associations, remember Watson and the bell and the rat and the screaming babies and crap? And through these associations, we start simple and we build to complex, right? We build to something far more. And that's the same idea in development is, of course, we start incredibly simple and then we grow from there. So now, in this notion of development, we have to think about 2 different types of development. And for many, 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 many years, the idea was that development is a gradually, it goes on, it's continuous, it's just sort of gradually changed. And by this notion, a child is a miniature adult, right? That's the idea. It's just, what is a child? Somebody that hasn't quite grown yet into an adult. But more recent thinking on child development is much more likely to think about something in the nature of a stages. That children are not miniature adults. That fundamentally children are different, okay? And they're going to proceed through a series of stages where we're going to find that, at certain stages, children just are physically incapable of certain tasks. You can ask them all day long. They cannot do them. And then all of a sudden, within a couple of weeks, like magic happens. And now all of a sudden, they can do this sophisticated thing they couldn't do last week. All right? And so when we talk about this idea of stages versus continuity, instead of saying one or the other, I personally prefer a model that's like this, where you're going, here's development, and it's gradual, and then it takes a leap, and then it's gradual, and then it takes a leap, and then it's gradual, so that you've still got these steps in there, but it's built into this notion of there's this constant upward continuity. Okay? So that's the perhaps better way to visualize it. Okay, so here's a good question. In fact, I believe this was a question that was on the discussion assignment. Are we essentially the same person over long periods of time? I mean, are we? Because clearly there's something about you that is the same as the day you were born. But at the same time, you now and you the day you were born are like worlds apart. So what is it that remains true?
We have the same parents.
We have the same parents, okay. We have the same influences across.
I feel like you so have the same personality, it's just more mature.
Okay. All right. I I'm going to say this for the personality topic because it's the only thing worthwhile, is that, yeah, I mean, personality does remain incredibly stable. They've done measurement of people's personality at different ages, and then they look at the connections, and it's like, you're the same person, okay? Which is hilarious whenever you see, and I'm sorry, ladies, I'm going to point out the ladies. It's almost always the ladies that end up with a bad boyfriend and say, I can change him. No, you can't. If he's a dick, all right? That's it. That's what he's going to be. So, no. Except, and this is so cool, when they look at a personality test before you go to college and after you go to college, it's like two different people. All right? It's like two different people before and after. But otherwise, it's the same person year after year after year. So there is some stability to it, but again, this one event will fundamentally change, believe it or not. You didn't know that you were in for a fundamental personality change, right? He's like, I just want 3 credits. I'm sorry, you're in for a whole thing. Okay. Temperament, we'll get back to temperament a little bit. There must be some stability to give us some kind of an identity, you know. But, you know, continual change. When I teach child psychology, there's 2 distinctly different approaches to this course, right? The entire discipline. And one is the notion of going chronologically and trying to learn about children from birth to age 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. And it doesn't work well. The other approach is to try to divide different aspects of the child and then study those. Like in this case, Lawrence Kohlberg's notion of the development of morality across our lifetime, our moral reasoning and our moral thinking. Or Erik Erikson's notion of our social development, how we develop in a social context. Or Piaget's notion of cognitive development, how we get more and more sophisticated. Or even as a 4th level, physical development, how we actually change in our physical appearances across ages. And it misses, see, the problem is the chronological doesn't do a good job of recognizing that there's different types of development going on. And if we look at it in terms of isolating it up by different types of development, we miss the chronological structure and nature of it. And so the problem is, there are 2 different approaches and they both suck. You got it? Neither one really works. And so it's really, as we're going through, we are going to break it down into, first we'll talk about, I don't even remember which one first, social development, then we'll do moral development, then we'll do, and if you're not careful, you're somehow doing like, oh, moral development is somehow different from social development. It's like, no. They interact with each other, they're happening at the same time. We're going to kind of pull them apart in an unnatural way and pretend they're somehow different, right? And study them as though they have an independent existence. But they don't. They don't. So, I guess, which one are we doing first? Erikson, aha, good. So Erik Erikson basically says that when children are born, they have to develop their social skills, their social self, okay? The way that they interact with the world. He says, and his work, by the way, comes very heavily out of Sigmund Freud, and y'all know my opinion of Sigmund Freud, and we'll come back to him in the personality chapter. However, he argues that as children proceed through, I mean, chronologically, they go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, they're going to proceed through a series of stages. And in these stages, you're going to have what he calls a crisis. And you will go through these stages and you will either solve it successfully or unsuccessfully. You'll go through these crises. Now, whether you're successful or unsuccessful is irrelevant. As your chronological age increases, you're just going to move to the next stage. And the way that you manage to solve a crisis in early stages will affect you later in life. But you're literally just going to go through them. You're tied to your chronological age. Okay? So, the first stage of social development is what he calls basic trust versus basic mistrust. And so what happens is that in this first year, the most important things that are going on to a baby is feeding, right? I mean, feed me. And so what happens is that in a positive sense, a baby should develop a social trust. That is to say, I'm hungry, I cried, and my caregiver was responsive to my needs. I trust that the world around me will help me and support me. Okay, this type of a thing. And so we find out that this is, having a consistent caregivers, having a routine, and you can literally see it in a child based on, the way that they feed, the sleep, and everything else. Okay? And this is powerful. However, in an opposite sense, there was this one orphanage, and I think it was in Romania, and they had no funding. And so they were overcrowded. They had like 200 babies and like 3 people to take care of these babies. So they literally put up like an assembly line for these babies. Okay? So it's like, here's what you do. You know what? Do you feed the babies when they're hungry? No. You go down the assembly line, you feed, you feed, you feed, you feed, you feed, you feed. Do you change diapers when they're full of poopy? No. You go down the line. Change, change, change. So the care that they were receiving was absolutely disconnected from their needs. Okay? You get the idea? These children, and I mean, I hate to say it, but they were just asshole children. They were so unruly, they could not get them adopted. Nobody, they came into the orphanage like, are you kidding me? I'm supposed to bring that child into my home. And it's not a surprise. I mean, their entire social development has been stunted at the very first stage. Like I said, I mean, early failures will pop up later. This orphanage did, in fact, thankfully, figure out their system, and they decided to invest much more heavily into caring for these babies. And then what happened was when these babies with good care were ready for adoption, people were like happy to adopt the children. They became, so it was an interesting idea that you have to invest more at the beginning, even though it costs more, it's actually better outcomes in the long run. Okay? In the second stage is this notion of autonomy versus shame and doubt. And I want to use this just briefly to point out that this clearly is the general psychology of the way American people think. Okay? It's the subtext is of American people. It just is. And so we find that clearly right here, this notion of autonomy, from a Western perspective, remember, from a Western perspective, we value independence, strength of the individual. Okay? Therefore, from a Western perspective, we say it is very important, the positive outcome is the child views themselves as strong, autonomous, I can take care of myself. Okay? From a non-Western perspective, this could well be viewed as a failure of social development. Because a healthy social development involves an understanding of how you are part of a larger, cohesive social system. Okay? So it's pretty an interesting idea that what we view as an ideal milestone in social development, many parts of the world would view as a failure. Right? So pretty interesting idea right there. So it is what it is. We're sitting in an American classroom. So we find this is also the age, perhaps you've heard of the terrible twos. Oh yeah, this is that time when, you know what a children's favorite word is? No. Clean your room. No. And from a Western perspective, this is healthy. The child is expressing their autonomy, expressing their individuality, showing their parents, I have a desire which is different from your desire. And this is healthy for them. Okay? We find that if children do not develop this sense of autonomy, they're going to start to feel shame and doubt. They're going to, can I do things? And it turns out and I mean, I'm not even saying there's anything that even comes close, is potty training. Potty training is the social event of this age. Okay? If you have children, I guarantee you will have about a year there where every dinner conversation is going to involve poo-poo and pee-pee in the potty. That is going to be every conversation. Nice. When my son was about this age, he We were living in Pittsburgh, and we discovered this video, Once Upon a Potty, and it was on DVD, or not even DVD, it was VHS. This is old school, and it was a rough day because you could only rent it, get it for 7 days, and then you have to return it, and almost inevitably somebody else would have it reserved. And so you'd be like, oh shit, so you have to return it and put your name on the reservation list immediately so that we could get it. Then when my daughter was born, they had a different version for her, and somebody made this on DVD for us, made a copy on DVD. And it was the greatest thing in the world. Holy shit. Because with the VHS, my son could not figure that out. Because you got to rewind, and it was much more complicated. With the DVD, you just go, ding, there it is. My daughter, I mean, I was at work, what do I know? But my wife tells me all day long, she would watch the video, it would get to the end, and she'll bing, back to the beginning. Watch the video, bing, back to the beginning. You know, like, who needs a babysitter, right? So, it was a funny video. I don't remember the girls' one, but I definitely remember the boys' one. And it was like, he gets his gift from grandma, and he's trying to figure out, is it a hat? It's not a hat. You know, is it a bird dish? So it was funny. And in the end, yes, I'm going. They all did a baby dance. I could sing the song, but I choose not to because I'm being recorded. Anyway, in our house, potty training was interesting because with my son, again, it's all about expressing autonomy, okay? And with my son, we were living in Pittsburgh. It was a rental, and it was all wooden floors. So we just decided to free range it, okay? Just take off the diaper and let it happen. Okay? And my son was able to control the whole bowel movement thing, but he needed to express his autonomy. And so he would always go and poop behind the closet door in his bedroom, okay? Again, my wife was at home, I was at work, same God, okay? And it was, you know, then we were able to direct the activity into the proper place, right? With my daughter, I don't know, some miracle happened. I mean, just all of a sudden one day we just said, I think we pulled up diapers for about a week. That was it. She just went from diapers to nothing, and we never had an issue. So, who knows? Who knows? Okay? And again, if autonomy didn't scream it out enough, an important event is to establish independence. Wow. Such a Western bias here. Okay? And so, in this stage, what you find is that children learn to initiate independence, that they can complete tasks on their own, things of this nature, start to get purpose and direction. Whereas the opposite is somebody that might feel a little bit of guilt, right? I mean, I had some ideas, I had some goals, I thought about the goals, but I didn't actually do them. Right? So this type of a thing. I'm going to leave the Oedipal complex for later. In this fourth stage, industry versus inferiority, it's really all about going to school, right? School becomes the predominant event in a child's life. And we're going to talk about that in somewhere, peer influence. So clearly it's school. And so what happens is, in a positive way, I mean, obviously in a positive way, children get good grades, children get bad grades, right? I mean, that's the basics. But the idea is, positive outcomes. Children are curious. They're able to be competitive with their classmates. They can do things. They get rewards from their teachers, things of this nature. In a negative sense is this notion of inadequacy. Their grades aren't very good. They don't have the skills to compete with each other. And as a result, they're often going to have low social status among peers, things of this nature. In the fifth, this is right, this is another one right here. Identity versus role confusion. And it is in this stage that peer relationships really matter. And I can tell you, when my kids were at this age, I don't know why, but they truly believe that their friends know more than dad does. I'm like, you do know your friends are idiot teenagers just like yourself. Your dad, he's got a PhD. All right, I think Dad knows something. Dad has seen thousands and thousands of teenagers. I know them, I've read the books, I've experienced them, but nope, that ain't what she's going to believe. My friends know everything. What we find is that there should be this healthy sense of development. Who am I? Something of this nature. Okay? And I found this to be fascinating because I didn't really have a lot going on at this point because it was fairly straightforward. In my town, if you grow up in my town, you're going to graduate high school and you're going to work in the factory. They're pretty much, you don't have to develop an identity. That's the idea. That is the entire town, without exception. Well, no, there's two exceptions. You could not graduate high school and work in the factory, or graduate and work in the factory. Take your career path, okay? And so I never had any of this identity development necessary. It was laid out in my community, what it was going to be. So then when my children were going through this, it was really interesting to me because, my children are biracial. So my children had to develop some kind of a racial identity. I never considered this. I grew up in Wisconsin, everyone's white. There is no exception to white. So why would I even consider racial identity? But they had to. And so it was really interesting to watch my children going through middle school and high school trying to navigate a world of what race am I, okay? And so it was, my son went through a stage where he absolutely wanted to be white, all right? When he moved to Texas, he said, I want to be called Jay, all right? His name is Jay Ado. Jay is my name, and Ado means son in Korean. And so his literal translation is Jay's son. And so he was always Ado. But when we moved to Texas, for some reason, he put his foot down and said, that's it. From now on, I don't want to be Ado anymore. I want to be Jay. I was like, all right, that's interesting. Then, throughout high school, he really embraced an Asian identity. Okay? He embraced his Asian side, and I believe it was because the Asian community was more accepting of him than the white community was. And I think that's why he gravitated in that direction. And then when he went off to college, they had some real good social groups that were Asian in nature, and he got heavily involved in that. But I think he's gravitating back towards more of a white identity, but I'm not sure. My daughter, on the other hand, refuses to take any racial identity. She will be just like, she tells me that most people think she's Hispanic. And I'm like, really? Because I hadn't really laid it out there. I hadn't thought about that very much. And so she refuses to label herself as anything. So, I don't know. But what actually was hilarious was when I took my son in for his driver's license. He passes his test, and they literally say to him, so what do you want to be, white or Asian? Right? It's like you can choose. You can pick your race, and you can believe this. And my son says, white. I'm like, really? Because he was at a point there where he had really been embracing Asian. Why? Why would say? It's your choice. I don't care. But why? Because if I ever get pulled over to the cops and they see my driver's license that says Asian on it, I'm afraid that I'm in trouble. Good stereotype stuff. All right. So it turns out that somebody that is perhaps homosexual might have to go through another type of identity establishment, right? I mean, it's just different forms of identity, different consequences. We find here in young adulthood, intimacy versus isolation. And it is in this stage that the most important event is perhaps a love relationship with intimacy involved, commitment. It is my opinion that we as a nation, and not just we as a nation, in most parts of the world, we are failing at this stage. That children, I call them children, but people in this stage are just not getting married. They're just not having children. They're just not. Do you know what marriage and children means? Sacrifice. It means you don't get to eat the dinner you wanted to have, that you have to eat what somebody else decides they want to have. You got a bonus on your paycheck, you can't spend it on yourself. You have to put it in your kid's college fund. Right? So it really, what I'm talking about here is the idea that you belong to a larger world community, and it is in many ways our obligation to sacrifice for that larger community. And I feel very firmly about this. I mean, I really do. And when I was a child, many people sacrificed for me. Okay, they paid their property taxes, which allowed the public schools to educate me. We paid for the roads that allowed me to get to school. I still remember one of the most important people in my life was some random kid in my classroom's mother who would come in for book reports. Right? She would give back to the school, give back to the community around her. And I think that is hugely important. At some point in your life, it is just your, in my opinion, your moral obligation to sacrifice for the greater community. It just is. People sacrificed for you, they gave for you, you took from them, and that's fine. We're supposed to take from others when we're young. That's just how it works. But at some point, you have to flip the switch and say, I am no longer a taker from my community, but a giver to my community. Okay? And in fact, that's how I deal with taxes, by the way. I pay taxes because it's just my obligation. I need to give back because people gave to me. All right? My success in life is the result of other people helping me out. Okay? So, I'm having a problem with that. But again, this is all over the world. Did you notice that birth rates around the world are declining? In the United States, we have negative population growth. Right? Why? They just aren't doing it. All right? In other parts of the world, it's to the point where it's tragic. If you look at Japan and Korea, they got about 20 years before the economy is just going to die. They just have nobody coming up to replace the older people. They just don't. Part of it is this inability to commit. But part of it is the world economy has gotten such that it's become impossible for young kids to establish a household, right? And I mean, I got it. I mean, in my grandparents' generation, a kid could graduate high school, right out of high school, get a job that would be good enough to raise a family. Yeah, you can't imagine that now, could you? Well, we're raising minimum wage $15 an hour now. I don't know. Shit, no. So in some ways, I blame it on social media, but in some ways, it's a product of a larger trend in economics. And this, okay, I got, since I'm on a rant anyway, I'm going to continue my rant, right? In the United States, we have this negative decline, and the same thing as in Japan. And so in Japan, they've got this aging population, but they don't have a younger population to take care of the older people, right? They don't have anybody to work in the assisted living, healthcare. They use robots. They use robots to take care of old people. Okay. How does grandma get taken care of? Robots. So they actually did this in the United States. They asked people, all right, when you get older, which would you rather have take care of you? Immigrants or robots? And people said robots. That is crazy as hell. That just scares the living shit out of me, that Americans would rather be taken care of by a robot than a physical human being because they have such a hatred of immigration. Immigration is the only reason the United States is not on a death spiral like Japan and Korea is. It's the only reason we're not going to collapse. So I'd have to say immigration is a pretty damn positive thing. When you see 20 years from now what Japan and Korea looks like, you'll know, okay? So, here we go, middle adulthood. I didn't make the words up. Okay, important event, parenting. Yes, oh my God, that's important. And so what is the positive, this notion of generativity? And again, this is reflective, as I said. You were a taker, for many years a taker. Now it is time to be a giver. It is time to get back to the larger world around you. Okay? Mentoring, working for the common good, things of this nature, whereas on the opposite side, there's stagnation. You don't change, it's all about me. I don't care about what anybody else is doing. And in the last stage of social development is this notion of integrity versus despair. And I feel comfortable that you all have seen people that have had this and this. And so I'm sure you've met some older people that are just full of life. They love life, they look at them, oh my God, they're out volunteering, they're in their community, you know the kind, right? And then sometimes you find older people that they quit, they just give it up, right? And this is a product of a lifetime of social experiences. And so clearly at this point, this is like, you're going to look at your life, you're going to say, look, I lived a life that was meaningful. I've produced things, I've done things. When I look back on my life, I have made the world a better place, all right? I think actions I have performed have improved my community, something of this nature. Whereas on the negative side, you look back and you see, in my opinion, this is me again, I'm full of rants today. In my opinion, certain people choose college majors because of Akina, and no other reason. In my opinion, people that live that life live this old age, okay? That going to college is not about Katinga, all right? I mean, it's part of the story. You can't be stupid. But the reason you go to college is to find the purpose, to find the reason for your existence. And I can guarantee you, plenty of my classmates throughout school are making a shit ton more money than me, with the same educational background. I got one guy, he works for QVC, the Home Shopping Network. He's pulling down $200 grand a year. He's got a mansion. He's got, and you know what he says? Every morning I wake up and I feel like a whore. My only job is to make more money for this program. That's it. I have no value. I'm not making anybody. In fact, I'm sucking out of this world. I'm using my knowledge to convince people to buy shit that they don't need. All right? That is not someone. And so I would argue he may well be living in a hell of a mansion, but there ain't no amount of money in this world that you could pay me to live this life right here. All right? I will not live this life. I will lose on a ton of lifetime income for that. Huh? So that's just, once again, my being me. Okay. So Piaget, now we're shifting gears. That was social development, and now we're shifting gears to cognitive development. But again, remember, they're running in parallel, and they're influencing each other. Certain things that are happening in cognitive development influence social development, and vice versa. They're feeding off of each other. So Jean Piaget, number one, he's the one that first set up this notion that children are not miniature adults. That if you attempt to try, and in fact Piaget's cognitive developmental theory is huge in education. If you are a teacher and you're trying to approach a child as though they're a miniature adult, you will fail, right? Because they fundamentally think in different ways. So we find these very young children, they don't understand the concept. It's a slide, why can't I slide on it, right? They can't get that, okay? So Piaget argues, in fact, one of my favorite things, oh, there it is, I got it up there. An infant is born into a world of buzz and confusion. Okay? When an infant is born, everything is brand new. There's no connections, no relationships. It's just huge confusion. And he says cognitive development is a struggle to make sense of this confusion, to try to find connections. We've already talked about, say, for example, when we talked about cognition, we talked about concepts. Remember that? A table. And so all of a sudden, this concept of table helps us to structure the world. Therefore, we can go into a new room, and there's another object, and we go, oh, that's also a table. Right? It helps us to understand and organize the confusion. Okay? So here's kind of the thing that's going to happen is that Piaget is going to use the word schema, But when he uses schema, he really means like the concept of table. Okay, so when we talked about that earlier, that's really what he means when he says schema. But what he's going to argue is that what cognitive development is the creation of these categories or schemas or concepts. Okay? So look at this. We got a little baby girl, and she's reading a picture book with Dad, and Dad says cow. Okay, cow. So this little girl's got this notion of cow. And that's starting to make sense in the world. Now, just like you, remember, if you have the concept of table, you go into a new room and you find an object with flat surface and four legs, you go table. Cool. She's going to try to do this. She's going to go to the zoo with her, well, I guess that's Dad and that's Mom, I can't tell. And she sees a moose, and she goes, cow. You see what she's doing is she's attempting to take her knowledge and apply it to a new situation. But Mama's going to say, no, that's a moose. Oh, okay. So what's going to happen is that she's going to have to change her representation of cow. She's going to be like, okay, cow, big, four legs, furry, moose, okay, big, four legs, furry with antlers. I don't know what she's going to do, but she's going to have to modify her understanding of what a cow is. Okay? And so he's going to use the words assimilate and accommodate. So she develops a schema of cow. She gets a new experience with a moose and attempts to assimilate moose into her existing structure, her schema. Because it doesn't work, she needs to accommodate her schema of animals to now, oh, moose is this, cow is that. Okay, I got it. Okay? So we attempt to assimilate new information, and when new information cannot fit with our existing schemas, we adjust the schemas to accommodate the new piece of information. Okay, right? Yeah, we said that. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so he has these stages, and again, when I say stages, I want to make it clear that this is what I mean by stages. It's some continuous development and then sort of a jump, and then continuous and then a jump. And so children at this stage just can't think in the same way that children at this stage do. Okay? Children at this stage, they still think they can ride on a little baby plastic car. They just don't get. Now they get it. I mean, that's it. They did not understand. They do understand. You know, it's just flipping a switch. Okay? So at the very earliest stage of cognitive development, sensory motor, okay, that everything about the world comes in through the sensory system. It all is about, can I see it? Can I touch it? So sensory motor. And that is the world. The world is what I can see. The world is what I can touch. If I cannot see it and I cannot touch it, it does not have an existence to me. Okay? So I must see it and I must touch it. But somewhere around 6 to 8 months of age, children are going to develop this thing called object permanence, which is this idea that once and this happens to dogs too. Dogs develop object permanence. If you get a brand new puppy, right, brand new, and you roll the ball and this stupid little puppy, and the ball goes under the couch, puppy's just going to stop. Because as far as the puppy's concerned, if I cannot see it, it does not exist. Okay? But then as the puppy gets a little bit older, what's going to happen is the ball rolls under the couch, and the dog knows the ball is still there, and scratch the hell out of your couch. Okay? And it's the same way with infants. That at some age, they're playing with a cool toy, you drop a blanket over the top, I can't see it, it doesn't exist. Okay? But then all of a sudden, it's just like, boom, that's just, then they can. Right? Then the next day, they've got this capacity. Right? So we find that Piaget's theory has been critiqued very heavily by researchers that have come up with clever techniques to test his theory. And it's no criticism of Piaget. I mean, he can only do so much in one lifetime. But for example, here, they have infants, incredibly young infants, And here's what they're going to do. They're going to put 2 teddy bears. Up comes the screen. And then they're going to show an adult reaching behind the screen and removing a teddy bear. Therefore, if the screen drops and it looks like this, that's the way the world should be, right? There was 2 teddy bears, you took one away, that's just life. However, what they would do on some trials is they'll go like this, go like this, go like this, and then another adult is under the table, reaches behind and puts another teddy bear back. And so they drop it, and there's 2 teddy bears. And do you know what babies do when this happens? They give you the biggest WTF look they've got. It's like, that is not supposed to happen, okay? There were 2, you took away 1, there should be 1, all right? They make it clear that they are able to mentally manipulate and represent, even though, according to Piaget, there is no way they can do this. This is just, they're in that very first stage. There is no their only comprehension of the world involves what I can physically touch at the moment, what I can physically see at the moment. This should not be possible, right? But they can. They absolutely can. In the pre-operational stage, this really is connected to the use of language. And that is because language is a representation of the world around you. So I say the word ball, and you now have a visual representation of an object, don't you? You can think about objects that are not currently present. Clearly, it is a huge stage in cognitive representation. According to Piaget, in a lot of ways, if you have not yet developed language, there is no way that you can have thinking about the ball in the room next door. You could not think about the ball next to you. Now, I think that Piaget takes it a little too far, but clearly language does give us a huge advantage on the way that we can navigate our cognitive world. Okay? What we find is huge symbolic play. This is absolutely where you're going to go play house. You know, I'll be the mommy, you'll be the daddy, and, you know, we'll do our role playing. Very important. But this is also a point, though, where children are very, what we call, egocentric. That they cannot view the world from another's perspective. Okay? So here's a kid, all right? Are you ready for this kid? He's awesome. Do you have a brother? Yes, Jim. Does Jim have a brother? No. What's wrong with you idiot, right? So he has the ability to view the world from his own perspective, but he cannot put himself in Jim's shoes to view the world that he himself would be the brother. You get the idea here? Yeah, that's a cool little trick right there, guys, okay? And so clearly what's going to happen is that at some age, children are going to be able to represent. And this is actually a huge cognitive milestone. And we call it the theory of mind. Theory of mind comes from philosophy originally. But theory of mind refers to the ability to perceive the world from another's point of view. Theory of mind is huge because it allows for amazing things like empathy, right? Feeling another's pain, being able to put yourselves in another's shoes, it's so much more. So before a child has passed this critical stage, I remember you go to a preschool, you know, and one preschooler takes a toy from another preschooler, and they want to be, you can't smack the kid, right? Instead, you got to be like, how do you think Jimmy would feel when you take his toy away? How the hell would I know how Jimmy would feel? I have not yet developed that ability. Got it? And yet that is the go-to. That is the go-to in preschool. How would Jimmy feel? How do you think he feels if you take away his toy? It's ineffective. Okay, it is not going to work. So absolutely, yada 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 yada. We find that in this earliest stage here, in this pre-operational stage, Piaget actually implemented what he called the 3 mountains test. And he had this big model that would sit on the table. And he'd have the kids sitting here, and they have an adult on the other side, and say, what do you think they see? all right? And at some age, a child just cannot possibly tell you what that other person is seeing. And when they're asked what are they seeing, they simply tell you what they see. Okay? Just right there. You find that this ability to develop, to show this theory of mind, appears to be the major malfunction in children with autism. An inability to view the world from another's perspective leads to many problems, social problems. They just don't understand what another is thinking. They don't understand sarcasm. Right? Sarcasm is gone to a kid with autism. Because sarcasm, you have to imagine, you have to understand that the person saying the words means the exact opposite of what the words literally are. And it's just nothing. It doesn't work. Okay? And children with autism often can't read the room. You know, they don't know what's appropriate words to be saying because they cannot comprehend the effect of their words on another person. And so an autistic child, without meaning to be harmful, will often say incredibly hurtful things without any idea that that would in fact hurt another person. They just can't grasp that. Okay, cool. Here we go. I love this. So now, a pre-operational child fails at this one. This is hilarious. All right, you see this? You ask the girl, which one has more milk? Oh, they're the same. She literally watches you pour it into this glass. Now, which glass has more milk? That one. So, magic happened? So, how can I increase the world's wealth? Just take every dollar and put it in a long line. Who's going to have more money? And my brother pulled this shit on me when I was a kid. I remember I got $1 for my birthday. I mean, this is a big deal, $1. And that's, he's 2 years older than me, so he was at a higher cognitive. And he had something like 37 pennies. And he convinced me 37 pennies was so much better than that $1. I mean, I'm like, you know, at 4 years old, you're on to something, buddy. I still think he owes me that 63 cents, okay? I don't know. With interest, that's probably going to be $1.04, right? Or here, which row has more mice, right? Even though it's the exact same number, there's a failure here, right? And so the old joke is, you know, you cut a piece of pizza, you give it to your kid, and you go, oh, I'm so hungry, Mom. All you got to do is cut that piece into two. The kid's happy now. Right, and now I got 2 pieces. All right, sweet. Now you're not hungry anymore. Works. All right. Somewhere here around 6 or 7 years old, you're going to start to see this ability now that they can conserve. Okay? And so what's going to happen is they can recognize like 3 plus 7 equals 10, therefore 10 minus 7 equals 3. In other words, you're starting to see the elements of things such as algebra, right? This is basically, you know, abstract reasoning, transformations. Clearly this is a sophisticated version of this, right? If this is true, then this is true. Because it's just the same thing represented in 2 different ways. It's the same thing, just represented in 2 different ways. So in the formal operational stage, again, remember, this is where the age when the children are starting to do like identity development, right? They're trying to figure out who they're going to be and what their social roles are going to be. And so we find that it is here that they start to use reasoning. They think about reality compared to ideals. Oh, God. Again, I'm going through this. I cannot make my daughter. She is a social justice warrior, okay? She wants to change the world, and she wants to change it now. And I'm all for that, okay? I understand. But I also would like to take your passion and perhaps tie it to the reality of the world we live in and work from there, okay? Because I like the passion, but passion without guidance equals chaos, okay? Oh, yeah. Okay? Justice, the meaning of life, human nature, yeah. Okay, so different levels. Now, I want to be clear here that though these are the stages of cognitive development, again, these are just really broad age ranges. not all children make it to formal operations. Some just never make it there. And this is particularly problematic. See, I'm trying to figure out what the current status is. But I remember 5 years ago or more, up in the Keller Independent School District, they were requiring Algebra 2 to graduate high school. And what was happening is that basically you were saying in order to graduate high school, you must be able to do it, and some kids just don't get there. It just doesn't happen. And they removed Algebra 2, although I think when they say Algebra 2, they mean just algebra, right? Algebra 1 is pre-algebra. But they removed it as a requirement to graduate. And I asked my daughter, what's the current? And she's telling me that the current was to take pre-calculus, and I'm like, is that true? Really? Damn, that's true. I never took pre-calc in my life, all right? I got a PhD out of it. So, I don't know, okay? So it's really unfair, though, to ask people that physically do not have the capacity to perform a task that they just do not have the ability to do in order to graduate high school. So flip into a third type of development. And yeah, it's perfect for today. A third type of development, which is incredibly connected to social development and cognitive development, incredibly related. And that is moral development. Okay? He felt that all human beings, when they're born, they have no morals. Okay? That all sense of morals and sense of right and wrong come from the family, come from those around them. Okay? So what happens is, and in fact, Lawrence Kober, one of the a quotation that sums up the way the world was thinking at the time he built this was Lewis Terman. Lewis Terman had a very famous quote. He said, "A stupid person cannot be a moral person." Okay? A stupid person cannot be a moral person. Like, damn, that's harsh. Okay? But that is the logic, is that cognitive development and one's intelligence levels are going to greatly impact moral behavior. That if you don't have the ability to think sophisticated ways, you cannot have moral reasoning. Okay? So his argument is this. When children are little, okay, they are what's called this pre-conventional level. And so what happens is that a young child's notion of what equals good behavior, what equals bad behavior, is a function of what consequence occurs. Okay? I say please and thank you, and that is good behavior because mom gives me a cookie when I say please and thank you. Writing on the walls is a bad behavior. Why is it a bad behavior? Because I get punished when I do it. Okay? And so this notion of moral development, or this stage of moral reasoning, is really just operant conditioning. Remember rewards and punishments? This is the moral reasoning that my dogs exhibit. Okay? My dogs have a sense of moral development. They exhibit shame, right? You know what it means? If they're exhibiting behavior that they know that I'm going to smack them in the ass for, when they get busted, down goes their tail, they won't look you in the eye, exactly like a small child does. Okay? So, very interesting idea. Now, according to Kober, not everybody will move out of this pre-conventional level. Some people will remain at this pre-conventional level. Good and bad equals consequences to read. And do you know what happens to so many people that get stuck here? Prison. They wind up in prison because they can't think of the larger social world around them. Okay? That is just simply very selfish morality. However, as a child develops a little sense of self, but again, remember this notion, if a child is egocentric and cannot take the perspective of another, there's no possible way they can move to this next stage. It's just not physically possible, because the next stage, the notion of good and bad behavior is not just the consequences to me, but the consequences to my larger social group. You see the idea here, the larger social system around me. So good behavior is often the result of, the laws in society. Okay? if mom will get mad, if I don't, then the cops will get me or something, right? And then at the last level, and again, Kohlberg says, by far the majority of people never make the post-conventional moral reasoning. They just don't get there. But at this next level is moral reasoning where good and bad has nothing to do with the consequences that happen here on earth. That somehow right and wrong transcends the consequences. That you can have a morally right and just behavior even if you're punished as a result of it. Okay? And so, yeah, I mean, moral reasoning that just goes beyond. And so, you know, I don't care if it's the law. It's not right and it's not fair. Okay? So, I like it. It's a good one. What we find, however, is that this notion that even if you can reason at a post-conventional level, doesn't mean you will. So my favorite example, I pay my taxes. And I already gave you an idea of why I pay my taxes. It's my moral obligation. People sacrifice for me in order for our community to thrive. We must sacrifice for each other. I mean, I do that. But you know what? You know why I pay my taxes? The IRS scares the shit out of me. All right? That's also true, isn't it? So at the exact same time I might be using level the post-conventional morality, I'm still tied into pre-conventional here. Right? Is anybody afraid of the IRS? Because I am. I can tell you that. Right? The older you get, the more complicated your taxes are, the more likely you're going to trigger a red flag. Okay? Oh my God. Now, what happens is that, again, this theory is connected to cognitive functioning greatly. And what has happened in study after study after study, they have compared males and females. Across the board, males have a higher level of moral reasoning than the females. It just is. And some critics of this theory is arguing, okay, you know, they imply that somehow this is better than this. There's this implication. Because what's going to happen is women often use this type of moral reasoning, because this is the type of moral reasoning that allows somebody to be a good mother, right? To sacrifice for their family, to do what needs to be done for their community. And there's no reason that we need to say one is better than the other. They're different. They're different from each other. But the way that Kohlberg laid it out was very sexist in this manner. Right? There's no reason one is better. It's just a different way of thinking. Right? It's just different. Okay? They also found that when they took this model and they brought it out to other parts of the world, non-Western cultures, okay, all of a sudden it collapses. Because when you do this with Western samples, you're going to get at least a couple of people that are showing post-conventional reasoning. If you take this out to more tribal level societies and ask them, 0 will exhibit post-conventional morality. If this is tied into a cognitive development, is that implying that people in these tribal level villages are stupid? That's the implication, right? No, they think differently. They have different ways of thinking about moral reasoning that are different from not less than. All right, that is fundamentally different. In fact, the argument is this is a fairly good model to describe Western people's moral reasoning. Western people's moral reasoning is based on autonomy, based on okay. You know, we've got the Constitution, and in the Constitution, the first 2 amendments are the Bill of Rights. How many amendments is it? Bill of Rights? That's why I didn't want to say it. All right, but the first handful are, you know, the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights literally says, you, as an individual, have these rights. These rights are yours. We cannot take them from you. And this type of moral reasoning is really where that comes from. Whereas, say, for example, here's a situation. In China, you're all too young, so I'll have to clue you in. The population of China in the 1970s was exploding. to the point where, I mean, they had overpopulation problems that were unbelievable. So they implemented a very harsh, at least I'm going to use my Western words, a harsh policy called the one-child policy. Y'all hear of that one? Okay. If a woman has had one child and gets pregnant with a second child, the local village administrator's job is to, I'll use my Western word, kidnap her, force an abortion on her, and force her to be sterilized. That's not the words they're going to do. From my perspective as a Westerner, it is an unthinkable thing. How the hell could you kidnap them and force this on them? And that's just not right. From a Chinese perspective, this is moral reasoning. The outcome to the community is always more important than the individual. How could you ever possibly consider the rights of the individual compared to the good of the global community? Our entire community benefits from population control, right? Joke is, by the way, that this one-child policy bit them in the ass, and now they all of a sudden had a stagnating population, so they decided to remove the one-child policy. And at first, they had kind of a bump in growth, right? A bump in births, but then it stabilized again, and they are on the same downward trajectory as Japan and China, Korea now, right? So, it's just like that. Whatever. Heck. So when we come back on Thursday, we'll talk about physical development a little bit. And again, this is intimately related to the other forms of development because, say, for example, boys that mature early are much more popular than boys that do not mature early. All right, so physical maturation. So they have social, but girls that mature early, it leads to some fairly bad social consequences as younger girls are sexualized and treated as though they are sophisticated grown-up thinkers even if they're 10 years old, right? So, completely different story. A 10-year-old boy with a beard has very positive outcomes. A 10-year-old girl that has breasts does not have positive outcomes, okay? So, we'll talk about more of that one on Thursday, okay? And I could be wrong, but if you're in my room watching a laptop, like a movie or something, you ought to stay home. Yeah, I'm just not pointing fingers, but I'm saying I believe that's what I've been saying, okay? So you ought not be doing it, but if you want to watch your laptop on a movie, feel free. Not here, okay? Don't want to have to point people out. Shayla, Kiara, Rusty's, Dorian, Alexandria, Dejan, Rye, Namaya, Nicole, oh, that's right.
So, I posted my notes on the exam, but it turns out it's 0, and then I posted it again, it's still 0.
Let me see, did you submit them more time?
Yes.
Are they in there now?
Yes.
If it's in there now,
But
then
it's still the 0, and I might show you that I did do it.
yeah. I will go in there as long as you promise me you didn't try to bullshit me.
No, like I posted it, and then I came out, and then...
I know sometimes when you submit it doesn't go through.
And then I got 0, so I was like, oh crap, and then I did it
Then
again.
there's your answer, yeah. Yep.